Hey, how's it going guys? It's Nate here. And of the many faction quest lines in Skyrim, I've long felt that the Dark Brotherhood's was perhaps the most well-written and enjoyable of them all. There's a distinguished cast of some of the game's most iconic characters, complemented by a narrative that emphasizes a clash between the guild's modern, pragmatic leadership, personified by Astrid, and the resurgence of a more traditional and historic force that emerges with the return of the Night Mother and Cicero. All the while, the organization plots to take down the Emperor of Tamriel himself. While the Dark Brotherhood's main storyline is certainly deserving of attention and even some applause, over the years I've come to the inescapable conclusion that many of its side contracts are far more impressive and detailed than I initially gave them credit for back in the early 2010s. You see, aside from the primary questline, throughout our time in the Brotherhood, we'll have the opportunity to accept various side contracts from Nazir, one of the Sanctuary's senior members. These are always presented as very simple missions, with simple targets who we're tasked with eliminating at our discretion. There's about 11 or 12 of these side contracts offered in total, and our targets vary from hapless beggars to powerful royal housecarls. And while these all may seem like casual, nonchalant Radiant quests, a closer look at these targets reveals that most of them have a far more interesting backstory and lore than the game immediately makes obvious. Indeed, a careful analysis of each of our victims will even usually lead us to potential suspects regarding who exactly placed the contract on them, as well as all sorts of interesting conspiracies and drama these characters have been involved in. Thus, that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to be investigating all 12 of the Dark Brotherhood side contracts and diving into the game files and taking a look at a metric ton of hidden and cut content related to them all in order to expose the deeper, more dramatic stories each one carries. And we're going to make a point of trying to identify the parties responsible for calling in all these contracts in the first place. Thus, without any further ado, pour yourself a glass of your finest Blackbriar Reserve, throw a log on the fire, and relax, as we dive into the lore behind some of Skyrim's most underappreciated stories. But first, a quick word from today's video sponsor. This video is being brought to you by STALCRAFT X, a massive MMO FPS set in the hauntingly atmospheric Chernobyl exclusion zone. Whether you want to explore mysterious ruins, hunt rare artifacts, or dive into brutal radioactive PvP faction wars, STALCRAFT X throws you into a ruthless world where every decision matters. Recently, a major update for session battles has been released, debuting a new map and merchant, unique barter branches, temporary paints and charms, as well as 2 new game modes, Deathmatch and Arms Race. With a non-linear, cinematic storyline and hardcore PvE events like Back to the Inside Out, you'll face twisted bosses, loot worth dying for, and a constant threat of distortion that hits harder the longer you survive. And it's not just survival, it's war. Join a faction, lead your squad, and reshape the zone in massive turf battles. This immersive fusion between a shooter and RPG feels fast, tactical, and rewarding, more than your average MMO. Enter the zone by clicking the link in the description down below and using my code on screen now to get a free welcome bonus pack. Just don't forget your canned goods. Alright, so Dark Brotherhood side contracts are generally awarded in these batches, which you receive at various points in the storyline. Shortly after being recruited and visiting the Sanctuary for the first time, you'll receive your first batch of side contracts to complete. Within the first batch, we'll receive 3 targets: a man named Narfi, a woman named Beitild, and another man named Ennodius Papius. Let's begin with Narfi, because he's a particularly compelling one. Here's how he's described by Nazir.
He's a hapless beggar living in some ruins just outside the village of Iverstead. Easy, even for you.
Now, this short description really doesn't do the character, or any of the other contracts later on, enough justice. And as we'll soon see, Narfi's story is much deeper than it's given credit for. Our target resides in Iverstead, a small town in the Rift with little going on. Its economy largely revolves around the accommodation of pilgrims on their way to High Hrothgar, but beyond that, there's little of note. Narfi can typically be found on the northern edges of the town, residing across a small river in the ruined remains of what we'll soon discover to be the home of his late parents. Now, here's the thing. If you approach Narfi with the quest on his life active, your dialogue options will actually be limited to just a few Dark Brotherhood one-liners, which may or may not scare him away depending on how threatening you choose to be, and that'll be that. He may seem a bit off, but nothing super out of line from what you'd expect from a beggar. However, if you approach Narfi before accepting the contract, you'll be able to have an entirely different conversation with him, where it will become obvious that he's suffering from some sort of mental impairment and is obsessed with the disappearance of someone named Rada. Take a listen.
I can't see you, Rada. I can't find you. Why are you hiding? Hide. Don't make me sad. Rada was here, then gone. Went to gather plants and never came home. Nope. Everyone looked and no one could find her. Wilhelm said she'll be back. Told Narfi not to worry. Rada will come back. With Father I said goodbye. With Mother I said goodbye. Rada leaves and Narfi can't say goodbye. Makes Narfi very, very sad. Narfi needs Rada to say goodbye.
This will begin the rather short quest, The Straw That Broke, and we'll be directed to speak with Wilhelm, the owner of the Villamere Inn, for more info. Wilhelm will explain that Narfi's been in this bizarre mental state since his sister, Rada, disappeared over a year ago. This suggests, though doesn't explicitly state, that Narfi was once more or less normal, and that the loss of his sibling has taken an especially strong toll on him. Wilhelm tells us that Rada disappeared one day while searching for ingredients on an island east of the town, and while he's tried to look for her, nothing's ever come up. He's pretty confident that the poor girl is dead. Take a listen.
If I were you, I'd keep away from the barrow on the east side of town. It's haunted. He's harmless. He's been in a state ever since his sister Rada disappeared over a year ago. He just keeps to himself in what's left of his folks' farmhouse across the river. I just said that to make the poor guy feel better. I'm pretty sure she's dead. Rada would gather ingredients from the small island in the river east of here. Then one day, she just vanished. I tried to look for her, but she never turned up.
From here, in true Bethesda fashion, the game will just give us a blatant objective marker, directing us to the location of Rada's remains. Her skeleton can be found underwater on a riverbed next to the bridge that leads into Ivarstead's main southern entrance. Next to the skeleton is a satchel, which will contain various alchemical ingredients, as well as Rada's old necklace, which we can then deliver to Narfi to provide some closure on the loss of his sister and complete the quest. Alternatively, we can also just lie to poor Narfi and say that we saw Rada in the forest or something and that she promises to come back soon, which will make him a bit happier, but doesn't really make a difference. Narfi will thank us for our help and give us some ingredients as a reward, more on that later, and that'll be that. He will continue to live as he did before, with no real change in his demeanor or mental condition, regardless of what option you chose. And that's it. Now, here's the thing. Bethesda seems to have made a pretty big mistake, well, a couple pretty big mistakes when designing this quest, and left out a critical detail, or at least messed up a critical detail, which really changes everything. You see, if we return to Rada's skeleton, you'll note its proximity to the Ivarstead Bridge, almost as if she jumped or was thrown off. Given the low height of the bridge, it seems pretty unlikely that she jumped, but we can't rule it out. Or, hey, perhaps she fell into the river and drowned. Alas, when you load into this section of the map for the first time, you may notice something interesting. 2 iron arrows will be floating in the river, starting just above where Rada's skeleton spawns, and then heading downstream. This always happens. Every time you first load into Ivarstead, these arrows will be here, drifting downstream from the bridge. A look in the game's creation kit reveals something damning. You see, these arrows have been deliberately placed into the world by Bethesda directly above Rada's skeleton. And then, of course, when the load space is properly loaded with collision physics enabled, the arrows just fall from their position and are then carried by the stream. Why on earth would anyone at Bethesda do this? What was the level designer thinking here? Well, I think it has to do with a miscalculation made regarding the game's physics system. You see, I think what the level designer here wanted to do was to have these 2 iron arrows poking out from Rada's remains, providing us with irrefutable proof that she was murdered to death. However, arrows are considered by the game engine to be non-static projectiles, meaning they will respond to the environment around them. Non-static objects can be moved by the player and will be impacted by shouts, by NPC movements, and of course, by water physics. So, the level designers here knew that if they placed the iron arrows directly inside Rada's skeleton, the water physics would mess them up. However, if you fire arrows into a body of water, they will become static and stick to the riverbed. So, what I think the developers here meant to do was they thought that by placing these arrows directly above Rada's skeleton, when the game was loaded and physics activated, they would fall directly on top of her, and then give that appearance of being stuck to her without being impacted by the typical water physics. Of course, that's not what actually ended up happening, because these arrows weren't actually fired, they just flopped into the water and float away. But even still, despite this mishap, the clear takeaway here is that Rada was killed and thrown off the Ivarstead bridge. This adds a whole new dimension to the contract we're offered on Narfi. Someone killed his sister, and now someone is after him. It's very likely that these 2 events are related. It only gets weirder, though. If we go back to Wilhelm, the tavern owner, after finding Rada's necklace, he'll say this.
Rada, you saw Rada. Did you tell her Narfi cries? Did you tell her Narfi never said goodbye like mother and father? If you're headed up to the monastery, watch your step. It's a long way down.
This is the exact same thing Narfi says if we choose to tell him that Rada's dead.
Rada! You saw Rada? Did you tell her Narfi cries? Did you tell her Narfi never said goodbye like mother and father?
I have no idea of what's going on here. I mean, the voice actors are clearly different. Bethesda had Wilhelm's original VA seemingly just read the same dialogue lines Narfi was given, and I don't know what to make of it. This could very well be a mistake by Bethesda. It's not inconceivable that the VA was somehow given the wrong script to read and that made it into the game without being noticed. Or, hey, maybe it could suggest something else. At the very least, Wilhelm was probably supposed to have a response to news of Rada's death. If we choose to take this bizarre incident at face value, something I'm hesitant to do, but see little alternative, it would suggest that Wilhelm is deeply disturbed by your evidence of Rada's death, and is particularly bothered by the consequences this has had on Narfi's own psychology. Regardless of what we make of this line, a prominent theory that's emerged within the community, one which I'll support for more reasons later on, is that Wilhelm is responsible for the contract on the poor beggar's life. That following the murder of his sister, Narfi's psychological decline deeply bothered Wilhelm, and he took a great deal of pity on the man. Or, perhaps, more nefariously, Wilhelm himself was involved in Rada's killing, and Narfi's constant whining was making it harder for him to forget what he did and adding too much attention to an event he considered over. Either way, he called in the Brotherhood to put the character out of his misery and perhaps tie up that loose end. One particularly glaring piece of evidence for the suggestion has to do with something that happens at the conclusion of the Dark Brotherhood questline. You see, after you've slain the Emperor and completed all the main Dark Brotherhood missions, including all of the side contracts featured in this video, the Night Mother will start giving the player these radiant side contracts. Generic, somewhat randomized missions where you'll meet nameless, random NPCs at random locations, and then those NPCs will dispatch you to go assassinate another nameless, random NPC at a random site. They're all pretty basic filler quests, just meant to keep you busy after the Brotherhood story's been completed. For instance, you can meet a scheming servant in Markarth, who may send you to kill an itinerant lumberjack in Morthal. That sort of thing. Well, one of the places where potential clients for this Radiant quest spawn, who the Night Mother will send you to go meet, is at the Villamere Inn, Wilhelm's Tavern in Iverstead. I'm serious. Wilhelm's business and home is a meeting place for potential Dark Brotherhood clients. Now, in fairness, there's nothing that necessarily indicates Wilhelm is aware of these shady underground dealings in his establishment. However, given so much else we've already seen, it's becoming increasingly obvious that the owner of a successful business, Wilhelm, likely has the money and now the connections to have organized the hit on Narfi. Still though, even if we accept this explanation, we're left to wonder who killed Rada in the first place, and why. Narfi's sister is described by both Wilhelm and her brother as a novice alchemist of some kind, who disappeared while gathering ingredients. What could possibly have warranted her murder? Well, there are some subtle suggestions that the game provides, which suggest the truth behind Rada's occupation may have been more complicated. You see, after recovering Rada's necklace and delivering it to Narfi, whether you choose to tell him the truth or lie and claim Rada will be back soon, regardless of what you say, he will reward you with 1 to 3 rare alchemical ingredients. Now, the thing is, rare alchemical ingredients are serious business in Skyrim. There's only about 16 offered by the vanilla game, and these are big items, like Daedra hearts, briar hearts, human flesh, hag raven claws, just to name a few. Stuff that's meant to be hard for the player, the Dragonborn, to acquire, let alone for a hapless beggar, or perhaps his supposedly novice alchemist sister, who he presumably got these from. If Rada was working with rare ingredients, fire salts, death bells, vampire dust, Daedra hearts, she clearly must have been more than an amateur just messing around in her free time. No, she was a serious individual. Could Rada have perhaps been a witch, or even a hagraven? Maybe this condition could even help explain the absence of her and Narfi's family, and perhaps Narfi's own strange condition he developed after her disappearance. When speaking to Wilhelm, he cautions us against venturing too close to Shroudhearth Barrow, a nearby, very nearby, ancient Nord ruin, which he claims is haunted, but when we visit, we'll discover that it's inhabited by a deranged elf named Wendelius Gutherian, who's been abusing a potion which makes him appear ghostly while living in the ruin for the last year or so, searching for a dragon claw he needs to progress further into the tomb. Wendelius's diary, again, reveals he arrived at Shroudhearth Barrow about a year ago, concurrent with Rada's disappearance. So maybe the insane elf, driven to the psychological brink by his potion abuse and repeated failures at finding the claw, is to blame. One day, Rada, perhaps searching for some seriously rare ingredients, ventured too close to the tomb and was attacked. Alternatively, even stranger, is that if you clear out Shroudhearth Barrow and slay Wendelius, you can take his diary back to Wilhelm, who will reward you with the Sapphire Dragonclaw. The very Dragonclaw Wendelius was driven mad trying to find and is necessary for progressing deeper into the Barrow. Where did Wilhelm get this? He's supposed to be afraid of that tomb, and yet he possesses one of its most sacred artifacts? Maybe it's a family heirloom or something, but it adds just another layer to an already insanely complicated web of mysteries entangling himself, Narfi, and the wider town of Ivarstead. There's no clear resolution here. Fundamentally, Wilhelm seems to be the most likely candidate to have called the hit on Narfi, but we can't confirm it, and frankly, as we've seen, that explanation creates more questions than those it answers. Nonetheless, the crazy lore behind Narfi's contract serves as a fitting start for a video like this, setting the example for just how deep many of these supposed Dark Brotherhood side contracts can go. Thus, let's forge ahead and take a look at the next one in Nazir's first batch. I promise, we'll manage to solve at least a few of them. Here we go. Our next target in this first batch Nazir offers us is Beitild, a Nord woman who operates Dawnstar's Ironbreaker mine, which produces much of the region's iron supply. Here's how Nazir describes her.
She separated from her husband several months ago. Now the two run competing mining operations. Beitild's angry and desperate, a fighter.
Separated from her husband, and now the two are business competitors. It seems we already have an obvious primary suspect with a clear motive. But let's not get too far ahead. Upon visiting Dawnstar, we can get a better feel for the situation. Beitild's Ironbreaker mine is located on the eastern side of the city. When approached, she'll be rather short with the player, but she also doesn't seem to be acting rude on purpose. Rather, she's clearly kinda stressed and working very hard. It feels less like she's cruel and more like she just doesn't have the time to be talking on the job. She'll briefly explain that she is at war with her separated husband, Legelf, who operates the competing Quicksilver mine on the other side of the city, and she clearly intends to outproduce him. Furthermore, she'll offer to pay you generously if you mine iron ore on her behalf. Much of her radiant dialogue is just complaints about Quicksilver mine and proclamations of her own operation's superiority to that of her husband's, suggesting how deeply this rivalry has gotten to her. Hilariously, if you approach her with the contract active and say, "Someone wants you dead, Beitild," rather than turn hostile or flee, she'll say this.
And let me guess, that someone is my so-called husband, Legelf? Well, the feeling's mutual.
If her schedule is anything to go off of, Beitild has a uniquely strong work ethic. She wakes up at 6 a.m. every day, takes an hour for breakfast, and then works from 7 to midnight every day of the week, nearly 17 hours, more than twice as long as most NPCs, implying how seriously she takes this competition. Within and outside of Ironbreaker Mine, most of Beitild's workers seem pretty content, or at the very least, not super dissatisfied with their work. They mostly say generic mine worker things with nothing unique about them. However, one miner, named Carl, clearly has some frustration with his boss. He doesn't have an actual dialogue tree, but in his radiant dialogue, he'll complain that Beitild doesn't tolerate his drinking on the job, and it's even possible to overhear a couple of conversations between him and his boss, where Carl seems to clearly be annoyed by the effort that Beitild demands of him.
Keep at it. We need to work twice as hard now that fat-headed Legelf has declared war.
We're at war with Legelf? Isn't he your husband?
No, he isn't. He's the enemy, and we are going to crush him.
Drafted into a war. How could my life get worse?
Work hard now. The pride of Ironbreaker Mine is on the line.
Pride of the what? This isn't the Legion, boss. We're miners, not soldiers.
You'll shut your mouth and get back to work. or you won't be a miner or a soldier by the day's end. Hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I think we can all agree that Beitild's ex-husband, who we'll meet in a second, is the most likely candidate to have placed a Dark Brotherhood contract on her. Carl's dialogue may warrant some suspicion as well. That said, it just seems unlikely that a poor, drunken miner would have the funds necessary to hire the faction out. Anyway, let's head on over to the other side of town and meet Beitild's rival husband for ourselves at his own operation, Quicksilver Mine. Now, funnily enough, the game repeatedly emphasizes that Beitild and Legelf are fierce competitors or something, but both their mines are producing entirely different types of ore. Beitild's Ironbreaker mine is an iron mine, and Legelf's Quicksilver mine is a quicksilver mine. Quicksilver is a fictitious metal that's the primary ingredient of elven armors and equipment, though it's also necessary for the production of Nordic carved armor, that unique skulled armor we get on Solstheim. Anyway, so while they both run mines, Beitild and Legelf's operations aren't really competing with each other, at least not over any market share. Their rivalry is purely egotistical rather than economic, which only inflates the pettiness of it all. Legelf offers very little dialogue with the player. If you haven't completed the quest, Waking Nightmare, you can ask him about the nightmares that have recently been plaguing Dawnstar's citizens, but he just gives you a generic response. Otherwise, when interacted with, he has a couple of radiant lines which allude to his dispute with his wife. We can, however, overhear two conversations with one of his workers, a kindly disposed miner named Lond, which further references Legelf's conflict with his former wife.
If you don't mind me saying, Legelf, you're working too hard. Go home.
Never. Not until we turn this mine around, drive Beitild out of business, and force her to apologize to me for everything she's done.
What is this feud you have with your wife? What started this?
I don't want to talk about it.
You don't want to talk about it, or you don't know?
I don't want to talk about it.
So, while the man might not say much to the player, clearly this conflict between the two of them has taken a serious toll on the former lovers, and they're both desperately throwing themselves at their work for a feeling of escape and to satisfy their own egos. Now, there's one more minor, no pun intended, source of information on this marital dispute that I would like to refer to. The Skyrim Official Game Guide. This is a 1,000-page hardcover book which features full walkthroughs for just about every single one of the game's main and side quests, full profiles for all of the weapons and armors, and an atlas of every hold in the game that describes virtually every single visitable location, even unmarked ones. It's an invaluable resource for lore, and it contains many tidbits and interesting facts that aren't revealed in the base game itself. We'll be referring to this text a few times throughout this video. In the game guide section about Dawnstar, it describes the home of Beitild in the Atlas, who has her own place. Here's how it goes. Beitild's house, owned by Beitild Ironbreaker. So that's her last name. Ironbreaker is her surname. Beitild Ironbreaker manages Ironbreaker Mine. She's in constant competition with Legelf Quicksilver, the owner of Quicksilver Mine, and her former husband. Beitild lives in the house she used to share with her husband. She refuses to do much else but tend to her mine, eat, and sleep. Unquote. If we visit Miss Ironbreaker's home, it's pretty unremarkable. There's a potion of vigor or stamina lying on the floor, which may be part of where she gets her work ethic from, but Legelf's house, on the other side of town near his mine, is a little more interesting. Because while his home has a very similar layout, all around his bed are bottles of Nord mead, illustrating that the man has developed, or perhaps long had, a bit of a drinking problem. Now, here's where things get kind of strange. After the player has slain Beitild, Legelf will get a new line of dialogue, expressing a sense of relief at his ex-wife's death.
My wife Beitild is dead. Can't say I miss that old saber cat.
However, he may also send bandits after us to avenge her if we killed Beitild in public. This is likely due to the fact that, in the creation kit, Legelf and Beitild, while they're considered lovers, they are still assigned as spouses. And this is just something that spouses can randomly do when their partner is killed by the player. So I'm not sure if we should read too much into this, but it's certainly worth noting. Inversely, if you decide to kill Legelf and leave Beitild alive for a while, she'll get a new line of dialogue expressing sorrow for the loss of her husband.
My husband Legelf is dead. I never thought I would miss that oaf so much.
So it would seem that Beitild, beneath her veneer of competitiveness, still felt something for her husband, while the owner of Quicksilver Mine was more genuine in his frustrations. Thus, I think this is a pretty easy case to close. Legelf clearly had the resources and the raw emotional motivation to put the hit on his wife, and he expresses joy at the news of her death. I believe that he is responsible for contacting the faction and placing the hit. However, this may not have been the way Bethesda originally intended for this narrative to develop. You see, buried very, very deep within the game files, there are these dialogue scripts for a handful of unvoiced lines from both Legelf and Beitild, which clearly pertained to an unfinished quest that never made it into the game. Mind you, these are scripts and they're totally unvoiced. They're only accessible in the dialogue view folders, but here's how they would go. At some point, you would be able to approach Beitild and ask her the following. "Are you and your husband fighting?" She would reply, "He doesn't respect me, always going on about how he could run the mine better without my help. Well, I'm gonna show him. Let's see him say he doesn't need me when he's out of business." Unquote. Apparently, at some point, we would be able to find a journal of Legelf's, which would reveal that he actually does still love and respect his wife, and we could show it to Beitild, saying, "You might be interested in this journal I found." She would reply, "A journal? What do I care about some journal? I have a mine to run." "It's your husband, Legelf. He says he still loves you." "Let me see that." "Oh, Legelf, you big oaf. You felt this way the whole time? I need to talk to my husband. Thank you for bringing this to me." Unquote. Now, that's all we have. There are no other references to this evidently cut quest anywhere in the files, and as a matter of fact, it doesn't even seem to have gotten off the ground. They cut this all out before they even called in the voice actors, which suggests it was cut very, very early. But apparently, Bethesda at some point in time had planned on allowing the player to reconcile these feuding lovers. Alas, obviously the writers ended up taking this narrative in a much, much darker direction. Our final contract in this batch offered by Nazir is for a paranoid, rightfully so, man named Ennodius Papius, who can be found at his small campsite just a few paces west of Enga's Mill. Evidently, Ennodius was once a miller at Enga's Mill. Something seems to have happened, and he no longer associates with his former employer, and his psyche has completely broken down. Take a listen.
"Why are you here? Get away from me!" "What? What do you mean? Oh, no! No! Ah!"
Now, Ennodius is a simple enough job. When approaching him at his campsite, he'll ask you in a terrified voice what it is you want from him, and no matter what you say, he'll freak out and run away. As a matter of fact, if you simply choose to remain silent, he'll correctly deduce that you're from the Brotherhood before running off in terror.
"Who are you? You're with the Dark Brotherhood, ain't you? I knew it! I knew you'd come for me! Mercy!"
Much like Narfi, despite being armed with an iron dagger, Papius has a permanently cowardly disposition, and will never attempt to fight back, with a measly 91 points of HP. He's often a one-hit kill. So the job is simple and easy enough, but what's the story here? Well, if we head down to Enga's Mill, his former place of work, we can get some crumbs of additional information. The mill is populated by 3 characters. Hilariously, none of which are named Enga. There's Ari, the owner and manager, and her 2 Nord workers, Leifur and Kadrir. None of these characters have a particularly robust amount of dialogue, but here's what Ari has to say about the operation.
That I am. My father left it to me after he died in the Great War against the elves. I don't care what's going on in the world. Rebellion, dragons awakening. The mill is enough trouble for me to worry about.
The 2 workers don't even have engageable dialogue trees. When approached, Leifur is polite enough, simply saying that he works at the mill and to talk to Ari if you need anything. Kadrir, on the other hand, is a much bleaker and more standoffish character, responding very rudely when approached.
Strangers are always trouble. I don't need to talk to you. Get lost. I swear that woman Ari doesn't appreciate all the work I do for her damn mill.
Oh, I've heard this one before. Watch out, divines. Poor Kadrir curses you all for giving him life.
Watch your mouth with me, you pup. Who do you think you are?
The man doing your job?
Interestingly, a look in the game files reveals that Kadrir is set to have an unfriendly and rivalrous disposition towards Ennodius, who we never see him interact with. Furthermore, when he and Leifur are working together, we can sometimes overhear the following conversation.
Whatever happened to Ennodius? He just up and left.
Don't know why you're asking me, but I'm glad that damn Imperial is gone. Something wrong about him.
You're all heart, Kadrir. I bet Lady Mara is weeping a special tear for you right now.
So, clearly, there was some genuine amount of animosity that Kadrir held for Ennodius, though he seems to hold everyone in animosity. Because of their rivalry status in the creation kit, Kadrir may even send you a letter thanking you for killing Mr. Papius. So, clearly, he's a primary suspect. But why? What could have led Kadrir to call the Dark Brotherhood on his former co-worker? Well, once again, the game files may provide us with some leads. As it turns out, there is an unused object in Skyrim's data package called Kadrir's Skooma, which was supposed to be used in some sort of freeform quest at Enga's Mill, which never occurs. We have no idea what this quest would have been about. All other references to it have been scrubbed from the creation kit, or were never even developed in the first place. But Kadrir's Skooma can be spawned in the game with console commands. Additionally, Ennodius has some unused dialogue as well. You see, while he only spawns in after you've accepted the contract to kill him, if you force spawn him in when the quest is inactive with the game's console, he'll have some special dialogue, which tells you a bit more about himself.
I used to work at Enga's Mill, but I had to leave. Someone's after me, I tell you. They're watching me. Somewhere. Don't talk to me. You could be one of them.
My theory, my suspicion here, and this is only supported by the limited data we have, is that Bethesda originally intended for there to be more backstory regarding Ennodius' falling out with Enga's Mill, and that Kadrir's Skooma likely played a role in that. Perhaps Kadrir, that hateful drug that he is, was originally meant to be dealing Skooma on the side, or even deliberately wanted to poison his coworker with it. One way or another, Ennodius got hooked on the substance. Or maybe just had a single experience with it that caused him to have an episode getting him fired from the mill. And Kadrir, seeking to cover his tracks and perhaps finish what he started, organized for the Brotherhood to execute the deed. Alternatively, maybe Ennodius was the one distributing skooma to the other workers. This is very circumstantial evidence, but at the mill, aside from the mill itself, there are two structures. One is Ari, the owner's personal home, and the other, separate home, is for the workers, called the Common House. The Common House has 3 beds, one for Leifur, one for Kadrir, and presumably an empty one for Ennodius. Now, none of these beds actually have assigned owners. They're all merely property of the Enga's Mill Workers faction, in theory at least, and therefore, in theory at least, Leifor and Kadrir can sleep in any of the beds. Now, in practice, I've noticed that the characters tend to sleep in the two beds on the north side of the home, leaving the isolated southern bed empty, and it seems possible that this one may have been Ennodius's, but I can't confirm that association. Regardless, on a nightstand next to this typically empty bed is a potion of haggling, which when consumed reduces all prices by 10% for a duration of 30 seconds. Why on earth would any of these common millers need something like this? They're not selling anything, that's Ari's business. Something was going on here. But whatever that thing was, only Todd Howard knows, and Todd Howard won't say. Next up in this batch, we have Hern. He's a vampiric miller who lives at Half Moon Mill on the eastern shores of Lake Illinalta, near Falkreath. He lives and works here with his, presumably wife, maybe sister, Hert, who shares his undead affliction. Now, notably, Hern will not spawn in the game until his contract has been accepted, meaning that if you visit Half Moon Mill early, only Hert, the female, will be there. However, regardless of who's hanging around, Half Moon Mill will always be an ominous place. At first glance, the location seems like just another lumber operation, but a deeper look exposes the much darker reality. On a stump just outside Hert and Hern's home will be a freshly slain rabbit next to a fork and a bottle of Nord mead, suggesting that they've been eating their meat raw. Breaking into their home itself only emphasizes this concern, as the couple have several pieces of raw beef, maybe it's not even beef, just sitting on their table alongside human skulls. And finally, the real smoking gun lies within the shack that sits on the southwestern edges of their property. Within this structure, which is clearly meant to be a drying shed of some kind, is an assortment of meat cuts, including beef, rabbit, venison, and bloodied human bones. Furthermore, further away from their property itself is some more, possibly circumstantial, evidence of the vampire's activity. Near a road just a few paces to the south of the mill is this stone cairn, which was clearly mortared with human remains. In the pine forests northwest of Hert and Hern's dwelling, there's this other site, which, again, is circumstantial, maybe totally unrelated, but one I can't ignore. A dead dark elf lies in a pool of blood, slumped against another stone cairn, next to a dagger and a coin purse. Now, normally I wouldn't make much of this. Bandits and looters are a common problem in Skyrim's wilderness. But if typical criminals were to blame, then they wouldn't have left their victim with a fresh coin purse. Wild animals are another candidate, but surely they would have picked their prey clean after such a kill. Thus, my suspicion is that this nameless dark elf may have fallen victim to the blood-sucking bride and groom, who live just a hop, skip, and a jump away. Now, as mentioned, like Ennodius Papius earlier, Hern won't actually spawn in until we've accepted the contract on his life from Nazir. However, we can speak to his, partner, Hern, at any time. Take a listen to her dialogue.
Hern and I do so adore guest. These guards are such a bore.
A guest? Oh my.
We have guests as often as we can, but there aren't a lot of travelers these days. The war keeps people off the roads. Other people just make things complex. Out here, Hern and I can get everything we need from the occasional traveler. We supply Falkreath to the south. Until recently, we supplied Helgen. Falkreath trades with the surrounding holds, and without our wood, they would have trouble keeping their prices low.
Interestingly, Hert mentions guards, but there are none that spawn anywhere near Half Moon Mill. The Falkreath patrols simply don't go this far. But, funnily enough, there actually is some unused guard dialogue in the game files, that references Half Moon Mill. We just never get to hear it because it's only meant to be played when a guard or Civil War soldier is near this location, which never occurs. Here's how it goes.
Hert keeps giving me this look. I don't know if she wants me or if she wants to eat me. Is Hert his sister or his wife? Or both?
Once the contract is active, we can meet our true target, Hern, and engage in a dialogue tree. Like with all of our other contracts, we'll have 3 options. We can choose to remain silent, which will spook him out and cause Hern to demand that we leave, but he won't actually do anything. We can call him out, declaring that we know his little secret, which will cause him to turn hostile. Or, and here's the weirdest one, we can say, assassin versus vampire, a fight for the ages. And he'll respond as follows.
Ah, so the Brotherhood has come for old Hern, has it? Well then, let us meet as equals.
How did he know that we're with the Brotherhood? There are all sorts of assassins and assassin guilds in Tamriel aside from the DB, yet Hern immediately recognized us for who we were working with. He's been expecting the Dark Brotherhood to come after him for a while now. The word must have gotten around to him. Now, thankfully, despite his affliction, neither Hern nor his wife offer much of a challenge. And notably, if she sees you attacking her partner, Hert will race to his defense, and if you run off without killing her, she may even send bandits after you to avenge him. So, right off the bat, I think we can rule out Hert as a suspect. Furthermore, the creation kit flags Hert and Hern as husband and wife, though it's not inconceivable that they could also be brother and sister, as the guards suggest. I mean, come on, what are the odds a guy ends up marrying a woman who has the exact same name as him, minus 1 letter at the end? Now, clearly this is either the product of cringe parenting of siblings, or, perhaps, a name change later in life. No offense to any viewers who may have a name that rhymes with their siblings. This is all for entertainment purposes, okay? Regardless, if it wasn't Hert, and Hern already knew that the Brotherhood was onto him, who could have called the hit? Well, there's no shortage of potential suspects. The vampiric lumberjacks at Half Moon Mill have clearly claimed countless lives, and any number of their victims as associates could be out for justice, making pinning down an exact candidate or even entity associated with them impossible. However, that's no reason not to try. I have a theory. You see, Half Moon Mill is literally just a few paces up the road from Shriekwind Bastion, an ancient Nord ruin which serves as the largest vampire den in the vanilla game. I'm serious, Hert and Hern live just a couple minutes walk away from the largest vampire coven in the game, excluding what comes on later with Dawnguard. Now, Shriekwind Bastion isn't involved in any major quests, though you can be sent here during some certain Radiant missions. Its vampires have no unique dialogue, and overall the game itself affords us virtually no real lore on the location. However, the name, Shriekwind, seems to offer us a pretty big clue. You see, the book, Opusculus Lame Bal Ta Mesomorti, tells the tale of how vampirism first emerged in Tamriel. Legend has it that a young priestess of Arche, who we would come to know as Lame Bal, who lived in Skyrim, was taken by Molag Bal, Daedric Prince of Dominance. And, well, to make a long, advertiser-unfriendly story short, he turned her into the first vampire. Afterwards, Lame Bal appealed to her patron god, Arche, for help, but received no reply. Thus, she unleashed a reign of terror upon Tamriel, infecting many more people and devoting herself to an eternal hatred of Molag Bal and her former god, Arche. The book contains this interesting line, quote, "Her screams became the shrieking winds, which still haunt certain winding fjords of Skyrim. Shedding a lone droplet of blood on her brow, Bal left Nirn, having sown his wrath." Unquote. So the name Shriekwind Bastion seems to be a nod to this line from the Opusculus Lame Bal. But this thread may go a little bit deeper than that. You see, throughout the now vampire-occupied Nord ruin are all these ancient Nord murals, which frequently depict a dragon priest flanked by snakes. These are all murals to the god Arche. As in the ancient Nord totemic pantheon, Arche, or Orki, as the Nords called him, the god of birth and death, is associated with the serpent. So, this Shriekwind bastion, named after LeMay Ball, a former priest of Arche, was itself once a temple to that same god. My hunch here is that this narratively unimportant vampire den may very well have been the temple of Arche LeMay Ball was taken from before being transformed, and thus its local coven is probably a far bigger deal than we give it credit for. And the vampire husband and wife just down the street from here likely have some sort of association with them, be it positive or negative. Perhaps Hurt and Hern are affiliated with the Shriekwind Coven, ordered to blend into broader Falkreath society for intelligence reasons. Hey, maybe they're just literally selling their wood to make money for the clan back home, or maybe they're former members who have fled and are trying to start a new life. Either way, this affiliation could place a serious target on their back, one way or another. The Shriekwind vampires would certainly have the resources to contract the Dark Brotherhood, as could many of their enemies. You know, maybe if they're not affiliated, maybe the Shriekwind vampires don't appreciate these other vampires down the street taking their kills and competing with them. Thus, we must consider the possibility that the person who placed the hit on Hurt may have been more than just a vengeful associate of one of his victims. But that's just a theory. A game that's copyrighted. After the first batch of contracts has been completed, the player will have to wait to receive their next couple of missions until they've advanced a bit further in the Dark Brotherhood's main questline. That is to say, you'll have to wait until Cicero arrives in the Sanctuary and the Night Mother speaks to you. Then, Nazir will offer 2 more contracts, starting off with one of my personal favorite characters, Lurbuck, a jolly orcish bard who resides at the Moorside Inn in Morthal. While Lurbuck is convinced that he's Skyrim's next big thing, unfortunately, the poor guy has developed a reputation for being the worst bard in Tamriel, and has earned the ire of many sad listeners. Here's how Nazir describes the contract.
He is, by all accounts, the worst bard in all of Skyrim. Apparently, so many people sought his death, Astrid had to hold a lottery to determine the client.
A lottery to decide who gets the contract. So, right off the bat, trying to discern a single suspect is fruitless. But let's go meet this boisterous bard and see what all the fuss is about. As mentioned, he resides at Morthal's Moorside Inn, which is owned and operated by Joanna, a Redguard woman who only recently moved to the city with her brother Phalion, who insisted on coming here for his own mysterious reasons. I actually did a full video on Phalion a few years back. He's an interesting and strange character, but I digress. Joanna is far less concerned with her brother's magical proclivities than the financial solvency of her business, which isn't doing that great. The Moorside Inn isn't getting enough travelers, and it's causing her enormous stress. She absolutely hates Lurbuck and his music, but tolerates his presence given that he's the only paying customer around, and there isn't much of a clientele to scare off. Take a listen to her description of the situation.
Lurbuck? Fancies himself a bard. He pays, so I let him stay. If I had any customers, I'd be worried about him annoying them, but, well, look around.
Furthermore, we can occasionally hear the following, rather one-sided conversations between the Redguard innkeeper and the Orcish musician, where Joanna makes her feelings even more obvious.
I'm thinking of composing a song about you, Yona. Would you prefer I proclaim your beauty, your strength, your...
Nah, just don't. Leave me out of it.
No interest in being immortalized in song, remembered and praised for all eternity?
No, I mean it.
When I'm known throughout Tamriel, you'll regret this decision.
At first glance, the innkeeper seems like a very, very likely suspect for having arranged the bard's death. But personally, I don't think so. She could have simply kicked him out at any time, and he's literally one of her only customers during an extremely financially stressful time. While Joanna might not love his music, there are easier ways she could have gotten rid of him. And frankly, I don't think she has the money to afford the Brotherhood's services anyway. When approached, Lurbuck will make some flavor of an arrogant remark, asking if you've come to hear his legendary serenades, and hilariously, when you tell him that you're an agent of the Dark Brotherhood, here to murder him, regardless of how you tell him, he'll simply refuse to believe that anyone could want a musical talent like him gone, and he will ignore your threat, not turning hostile or running away.
Ha! Oh, that's a good one, friend. Killing Lurbuck. I mean, can you imagine something so ludicrous? Depriving the world of my unique talents?
Overall, Lurbuck is a pretty easy kill. Simply wait for Joanna to exit the room, or follow him into his at night. He sleeps from midnight to 8 a.m. and spends every other waking hour playing in the tavern hall. So he's nothing if not predictable. While Joanna may not have summoned the Dark Brotherhood, it seems obvious that Lurbuck's contract must have been organized by another resident of Morthal, or perhaps a traveling passerby, and given that Nazir explicitly states, multiple people have sought his death, I don't at all doubt that that's at least somewhat the case. But I have a certain suspect in mind that may not be immediately obvious. You see, if you end up slaying Lurbuck in public, meaning someone, probably Joanna, witnesses you, later on, it's possible that you'll be tracked down by a courier, who will give you a letter from the Orcish chief Burguck, who will inform you that he knows what you did to Lurbuck, and is glad it happened, and in the letter will be a few septims for your effort. Burguck is the chief of the Orcish stronghold Dushnik Yal in the Reach. Dushnik Yal is a large stronghold, but plays a rather minor role in the game's narrative. It only offers one Radiant quest, and Burguck doesn't even have anything to do with it. Nonetheless, a look in the game files reveals that Burguck is actually assigned as Lurbuck's father, and the two have a rivaled disposition towards each other. Lurbuck is the chief's estranged son. Indeed, this is further confirmed by Skyrim's official game guide. In the section on Morthal, here's how it describes the Moorside Inn. Moorside Inn, inhabited by Jana and Lurbuck Grow Dushnik. In the Orcish language, Grow simply means of, so his name is essentially Lurbuck of Dushnik, according to the game guide. It continues, Joanna is the sister of Phalion, both from Hammerfell. She and her brother have traveled together their whole lives, but when something drew Phalion to Morthal, they both settled down. The town was without an inn at the time, so Joanna modified one of the homes. She doesn't get a lot of business, but she does appreciate visitors who stop by and can stand to hear Lurbuck's painful songs. Search a woven basket that sits atop a dresser in one of the rooms, and find a hidden skill book. Unquote. So, mostly just a bunch of Joanna and Phalion lore. Frankly, now I kinda want to redo that investigation, but I digress. Lurbuck is clearly the son of Dushnik Yal Chief Burguck. Heck, their names even sound similar. And while Burguck himself is a rather generic orc chief who lacks much unique dialogue, we know that martial strength and warrior-like characteristics are deeply valued in Orisimer society, especially within their strongholds. The book, The Code of Malakath, a text which describes the laws all orcs live by, explicitly states that orcs are raised from birth to practice the art of war, and those who fail to get along with their chief are often expelled from the stronghold. Perhaps this is a fate Lurbuck suffered. Whether he left voluntarily or by force, it's likely that this bard just wasn't cut out for the warlike ways of his family, and ended up on a very different path that his father didn't approve of. Thus, my suspicion is that Lurb's own father or family members may have been among the many people who solicited the Brotherhood for his assassination, in an effort to redeem his family of what he sees as a great shame. Furthermore, a look in the game files reveals that Chief Burguk may be a leader of more than just Dushnik Jarl, though this link is somewhat tenuous. You see, there is an unvoiced dialogue line for a male Orcish NPC in the files, not assigned to any specific NPC, just a generic male Orc, which reads, quote, "This stronghold is Dushnik Jarl, home of Burguk, chief of all orcs in the Reach," unquote. It's very likely that this line was meant to be said by the gate guard at the stronghold of Dushnik Jarl, evidently implying that Burguk has authority not only over this place, but over all orcs in the Reach. Now, there's only one other stronghold in the region, that being Mor Khazgor, but in theory, Chief Burguk may have some authority over that compound as well, making him, and by proxy his son, even higher on the Orcish food chain, and only adding to Burguk's embarrassment of his bard boy. Thus, I think we can safely conclude that among all the various petitions the Dark Brotherhood has received for Lurbuck's head, at least one of them has come from the chief of Dushnik Jarl. After Lurbuck and Hern have been dealt with, once again the Dragonborn will have to complete a few more missions within the Dark Brotherhood's primary quest line before Nazir will have more contracts for you. Specifically, you have to progress up to the primary quest, Bound Until Death, where you're sent to assassinate an imperial noblewoman on her wedding day in hopes of attracting the Emperor's attention. Anyway, once that's done, Nazir will have 3 more contracts waiting for you. The first of which is for an Argonian named Deekus. Here's how Nazir introduces him.
He's an Argonian layabout, likes to scavenge shipwrecks. My guess is he'll run if threatened, or swim if given the chance.
Deekus can be found at a small campsite next to Hela's Folly, a shipwreck that must have crashed sometime recently, given that Deekus is clearly scavenging it and finding all sorts of valuable artifacts. His camp is littered with jewelry, gems, coin purses, even a golden statue of Dibella. In total, Deekus has looted thousands of septims from this shipwreck already, and frankly, the real money to be made is from looting his camp over collecting the contract fee. But I digress. Deekus is a pretty easy target. He has a cowardly disposition and will flee when provoked. When approached, he's pretty timid. He'll ask that you go find your own shipwreck and stay away from his. If you tell him you're an assassin here to collect a bounty on him, he'll kinda grovel and beg for mercy, which is kinda sad.
What? Why? I don't understand. I've done nothing to wrong you. Please, mercy.
Unfortunately, of all the targets offered to us by Nazir that we'll be looking through throughout this video, Deekus, along with a certain Khajiit we'll get to shortly, is probably one of the least well fleshed out from a lore perspective. In the game files, he is a member of no factions, he has no registered relationships with any other NPCs in the creation kit, and has no involvement in any additional quests. His name never even comes up. So this all makes the Argonian a pretty difficult character to analyze, and it's even harder to come up with potential contract suspects. Perhaps a business partner he ripped off wants vengeance, maybe an old passenger of the ship heard about his looting and wanted to put a stop to it, or it could be that the priestesses of a temple of Dibella knows that he has stolen one of their matron's statues and seeks its recovery, though that would more be a job for the Thieves Guild. Whatever the case, let's just save some time on Deekus to focus on some of the more fascinating characters. Sorry, Lizard. Next up, this one's fun. So our next contract is for Anoriath. He's a Bosmer hunter living in Whiterun. He and his brother Erlander own the Drunken Huntsman Inn and Tavern, and when he's not managing the tavern or resting, he can usually be found selling his game at a stall in the city's marketplace. Anoriath is an eminently polite and well-mannered character, especially in his limited interactions with the player. He's not involved in any major quests, nor does he even have a dialogue window, but his radiant phrases are all pleasant and well-mannered. But if you pay close attention to his interactions with other characters, potential candidates for calling the Dark Brotherhood hit on him quickly become obvious. Conversations with his brother reveal a bit of tension over the business, with Erlander regularly annoyed by what he clearly sees as Anoriath's excuses to shirk his responsibilities. Listen to this conversation.
I've been thinking of hunting out beyond the boundaries of Whiterun Hold.
Again? You just had an extended hunt last month. To the Pine Forest, wasn't it?
That was 3 days. I'm thinking more like 3 weeks.
3 weeks? You're mad. You can't keep the stand closed for that long.
Why not? Business has been terrible. Most folk would rather hunt their own meat than buy ours.
Nonsense. That's just an excuse for you to avoid working and commune with the greenwood like our fathers of old, and blah blah blah.
Congratulations, brother. You've been living in Skyrim so long you've become a Nord.
At least the Nords don't shirk their responsibilities.
Another conversation the pair can be overheard having revolves around a missing letter from their father. Evidently, the two brothers are far from home and regularly exchange communications with their father, who's probably back down in Valenwood.
It's been 2 months and no word from father.
Don't worry, brother. I'm sure he's fine. We've waited longer before receiving a letter.
Might be worth riding out to Solitude, see if a messenger ship's come in.
If it'll put your mind at ease, then I agree. But not now, all right? We need the business from the stand.
So, Anoriath is constantly seeking excuses to get away from work, much to the annoyance of his more responsible brother. Erlander himself lacks much dialogue with the player, but you can ask him why he and Anoriath chose the name Drunken Huntsman, and he'll relate the following tale.
Ah, hello, my Nord friend. In the market for some hunting supplies? Yes, I hear that question often. My brother Anoriath and I came up with it one night after consuming rather too much mead. After our drinks, we went out for a moonlight hunt. We got separated, and in his drunken state my brother mistook me for a deer. He shot an arrow that pierced my, rump. After such a memorable adventure, we knew we had the name for our shop.
So, Anoriath annoys his brother by trying to shirk his duties, and has even shot him with an arrow once in the past. Right off the bat, there's some potential here. However, Erlander clearly doesn't seem too hung up on the chainy move his brother pulled, and frankly, Erlander's real grievance is that he needs his brother's help. Hiring the Dark Brotherhood to kill him would hardly solve this problem, and thus, I think we can write Erlander off the suspect list. For now, anyway. So, who else could have it out for this polite but irresponsible Bosmer? Well, we can listen to him have several conversations with various citizens of Whiterun during his time at the stall. And honestly, I think Anoriath conducts himself great. Take a listen to some of these conversations he can have with Nazim or Isolde. So, clearly he's pushed back a bit on Nazim, but their rivalry doesn't seem to be particularly intense, and he seems downright friendly with Isolde. However, there is one character that seems to feel a bit more... It seems to have a bit more of a tense relationship with Anoriath. Listen to how he interacts with Ulfina Battleborn.
Ah, Ulfina, how may I help you?
Got any sausages? I'm cooking a special breakfast for a friend, and they're his favorite.
Would your good friend be named John, by any chance? I've spied the two of you talking quite intimately.
Best you forget whatever you think you saw, Elf. Such idle talk can prove hazardous to one's health.
I think we found ourselves another suspect. So, for those of you out of the loop, Ulfina Greymane is having a secret romantic affair with John Battleborn. Their two families, Greymanes and Battleborns, are obviously staunch rivals and thus wouldn't approve of this relationship. But it's clear that these Romeo and Juliet-style lovebirds aren't letting that stop them and are trying to keep things under wraps. The following conversations can be overheard between the two at the Bannered Mare Tavern, confirming the romance.
I want to see you when you're done working.
I can't, not tonight. I need to go home. I swear my family is starting to suspect something.
That's your imagination running wild. Nobody knows how we feel about each other.
Don't say that out loud. Not here. And the answer's still no. But tomorrow, definitely.
Now, Ulfina is a particularly prominent member of the Greymane clan. Her father is Jurlund Greymane, smith of the Skyforge, who is widely known as the greatest smith in all of Skyrim. Her uncle, Vignar, is a former companion who will become Jarl should the Stormcloaks take the city, and Ulfina actually becomes his housecarl. John Battleborn is of a much lower pedigree within his own house, and as a matter of fact, he openly laments how stupid this conflict between the Greymanes and Battleborns is. He seems to yearn for a life as a bard more so than the warrior his family insists he become. Either way, Ulfina clearly does not want news of their love to leak, and when Anoriath expresses that he knows about it, she openly threatens to harm him. She certainly would have the resources needed to summon and pay for a Brotherhood contract, and clearly has the ambition. Thus, in my opinion, she is our primary suspect. Furthermore, there's some evidence that the narrative regarding her love with John was originally meant to be even deeper. In the game files, we can find an unused letter from John to Ulfina, simply titled, Letter from John. It reads, quote, My dearest Ulfina, how long will this go on? The sneaking around, the missed opportunities, I feel like I can't take it anymore. I love you, and you love me, that's all that matters. Anyone who has a problem with it doesn't really care for either of us. Signed, John. While unused, this letter highly suggests that John was more than willing to go public with the relationship. It's always been Ulfina trying to keep it under wraps. Given that this letter was cut, it's conceivable that there were other related elements to this storyline that were also trimmed, which perhaps could have provided even more insight on Ulfina's potential wrath towards any who might reveal her secret. Alas, cut content or not, I think it's safe to say that Ulfina is the primary suspect, and we can only hope that her love for John has made it all worth it. And finally, last in this batch, is Morandru Joe. He's a Khajiit caravaneer, and evidently a mage of some kind, who travels around with Risad's caravan. Notably, Risad's caravan sticks to and only travels between the cities of Whiterun and Markarth exclusively, spending 2 days at one before spending another day or two traveling the roads to the next, and then repeating the cycle. Now, Khajiit names tend to be riddled with descriptive honorifics in their native language, called Ta'agra, and Morandru Joe's name is no exception. The prefix Ma in their native language means apprentice or student. It can also mean child or young one in certain contexts. Whereas the suffix Joe means mage or wizard. Thus, his name suggests that he's an apprentice or learning mage of some kind, which tracks given that he will use a spark spell alongside an elven sword when attacked. He also knows a healing spell and a lesser ward spell. Unfortunately, beyond these very base facts, there's little this Khajiit, or anyone else in his caravan has to say. Marandru Joe offers no dialogue trees prior to taking the contract, only possessing a couple generic radiant lines of Khajiit merchant dialogue, and when you approach him on behalf of the Brotherhood, he'll have virtually nothing of substance to say.
What? You dare challenge Marandru Joe? You will suffer for your insolence. You are dead.
The other members of the caravan aren't much better either. Rasad, the leader who we can trade with, does offer us a short description of his homeland elsewhere when prompted.
The Khajiit hail from a distant land called Elsewhere, bordered on the north by Cyrodiil, and the south by the glistening blue waters of the sea. Elsewhere is an arid land of deserts and rocky canyons, where the sun shines warmly, always. There are cities so ancient, the sands have swallowed them whole. But now I will say no more, for I miss my home greatly.
The other two members of the caravan, Ataba and Kayla, a pawnbroker and guard respectively, are essentially non-verbal with the player. Furthermore, Marandru has no relationships with any NPCs in the game files. He's simply a member of the Khajiit caravan faction and has random commoner loot in his inventory. This all makes this specific wanted Khajiit a particularly hard character to clock, as there are no real suspects that can be identified. During the Thieves Guild questline, while the faction is working to establish connections with potential fences who could help launder their stolen goods, the player will actually briefly work with Rasad to establish an alliance between him and the Thieves Guild, and it's implied that Rasad is actually uniquely powerful among the various caravan clans, seemingly, in fact, being in charge of several of the ones operating in Skyrim.
Well, as you know, the guild's growing and things are looking up around here. The only thing we're lacking is a reliable way to transport our merchandise across Skyrim. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but there are several Khajiit caravans that travel across the realm. They're shrewd traders and don't mind getting their hands dirty. I bartered with their leader, Rasad, on more than one occasion. Actually, I want you to bring him something. You see, the caravans are notorious for transporting illegal substances. Present Rasad with this satchel of moon sugar, and I bet my last septim he'll make a deal. Rasad is the head of a small syndicate of independent merchant families. Each caravan is obliged to pay dues, but in return, a small portion of the profits are shared between them, and the leader parcels out the routes. If we could make contact with them, they could provide an excellent way to inconspicuously transport goods for us. You'll find Rasad with his caravan group. Just don't do anything stupid when you get there.
Who are you, and what do you want? Yes, I've heard the guild is rising back to power. An alliance would be most beneficial to both parties. I will consider the offer, but I'll have to discuss it with the other caravans.
But that's just Rasad, and where Marandru Joe fits into this, a novice mage, isn't very obvious. Like Deekus, this contract seems to be one of the less exciting ones. So, let's just go ahead and jump ahead. So, Fort Greymore is a large fortress just west of Whiterun. At the start of the game, it'll be home to a clan of bandits. However, after the siege of Whiterun, the winning faction's soldiers will occupy the structure and continue to do so for the remainder of the game. Hilariously, no matter who holds Fort Greymore, be it bandits, legionnaires, or stormcloaks, our next Dark Brotherhood contract can be found inside. Meet Agnis. She's a grumpy, elderly Nord woman who insists on serving as the fort's maid no matter who's in charge. Here's how Nazir introduces the contract.
She's a maid, old and feeble. But with this contract, it's much more a matter of where than who. Your political affairs are your own, but any allegiance you may have in the ongoing war could very well affect your access to Fort Greymore.
Again, the funny thing about Agnis is how she'll always be the maid no matter who's in control. Even supposedly vicious bandits who have their victims strung out on the walls outside seem to tolerate her presence. And while bandits or one of the Civil War factions may be hostile to the player, Agnis never will be. She'll be undisturbed by her rampaging through the fort and will simply continue cooking and cleaning, rain or shine. When approached with the contract inactive, she'll have one of the following radiant lines of dialogue.
I just cook and clean and do whatever it is they ask of me. I can't even keep track of all the people who have been in and out of this fort. They come, they go. I barely notice. Hard enough to keep up with who owns this fort. One side takes over, the other runs away. I tell them, I ain't leaving. I come with the place. Ha! I remember one morning long time ago, I woke up and the place was run by some orcs. Went to bed that night, it was all vampires. Don't matter to me. Now then, I've been gabbing long enough. Too much cleaning to do.
If you approach her with the contract active and threaten her, she'll simply ignore you and return to work.
You fighter types are always underfoot. You want me to clean? Then scat! But I have more rooms to clean. Fort Greymar is quite large, and rather filthy if I do say. I really must get back to my duties. This fort isn't going to clean itself.
Unfortunately for her, Agnes's efforts to maintain a clean castle are constantly being frustrated and undermined by the nature of its militaristic inhabitants. Indeed, we can find a letter from her addressed to Fort Greymoor's captain in his quarters, titled Complaint Letter, which reads, quote, "Now listen here, you muttonhead. I've told that lot of ill-trained whelps you call soldiers time and time again about tracking in mud all over the fort. And what do I find all over the mess hall? The biggest mud pile I have ever seen. I want you to order them to wipe their feet off on the hay before trumping in. That's what it's there for. Oh, and another thing. Those bear traps you gave me for the skeevers in the cellar? Useless. I've had those down there for weeks and have only caught one of them. The rest keep coming back. Get some of your men down there to clear them out. Unless, of course, you like finding skeever hair in your dinner, because I can always stop picking it out for you." Unquote. I assure you, there is nobody in Tamriel that Fort Greymoor captain would tolerate speaking to them like that, other than Agnis. Alas, it would seem her feelings towards the troops are mutual, as not too far away will be another letter, titled Soldier's Request. Quote, "Commander, you've got to do something about Agnis. The old bat keeps coming into the barracks in the middle of the night and straightening up. How are we supposed to be alert and on watch when she's knocking things around and muttering to herself and keeping us from getting any sleep? And she keeps taking all of our gear and putting it on the shelves, but she mixes them all up. What if there is an attack and we can't get out the door in time because we can't find our own boots? I know you feel bad for the old lady, but if you can at least keep her out of the barracks, we'd all appreciate it." Unquote. Suffice it to say, while this old maid has become one of my personal favorite supporting NPCs, I don't think we need to look too far to identify potential suspects for the Dark Brotherhood hit. Her strained relationship with the men likely motivated one of the troops who couldn't bear to harm her himself, or at least deal with the consequence of being caught harming her, to call the hit. And the rest is history. Alas, I have full confidence that this fiery Nord has much to look forward to in Sovngarde. Next up, after Maloril, we have Helvard. He's a Nord housecarl in Falkreath, serving Jarl Siggeir alongside Nenya, the court's royal steward. Now, Falkreath's politics are some of the most interesting in Skyrim, and Helvard is right in the middle of all of it. You see, until very recently, the Hold was ruled by Jarl Dengir of Stun, an elderly, very traditional Nord who seems to have been governing for at least several decades. However, after Skyrim was thrust into its civil war, Dengir, who likely would have supported the Stormcloaks, was seemingly made to abdicate, and replaced by his younger, more Imperial sympathetic nephew, Sidgir. Notably, Dengir still resides in Falkreath, and even enjoys the title of Thane. Thus, he's still honored by the current administration, and has been allowed to retain some privileges. But he's lost his actual power. Sidgir is a truly contemptible character. He's extremely overindulgent, and seems entirely disinterested in the idea of governing. He brags about leaving the actual ruling to his housecarl and steward, while he just sits on the throne and reaps the financial benefits. But he plays ball with the Empire, and thus enjoys the support of its legions. When spoken to, Sidgir will claim that his uncle had simply grown too old to continue ruling, and thus voluntarily relinquished power to himself for the good of the hold.
My uncle Dengir was Jarl until a short time ago. His old age and failing health caught up with him, and he stepped down. He now serves us honorably as Thane, and to the great benefit of the hold, I now serve as Jarl.
But Dengir rejects this tale. He claims to have been the victim of an imperial conspiracy and forced out. He openly condemns his nephew and claims that Sidgir has no business ruling, having been handed everything in life, including his position on the throne.
Aye, not so long ago. Some'll tell you I stepped down on account of my old age. Truth is, I found out about all the Imperial spies crawling around Falkreath. A few well-placed bribes, and they bought themselves some friends. Suddenly, the nobles are calling for a new Jarl, and all the while their pockets are jingling with the sound of Imperial septons. They named me Thane. They got my nephew Sidgir in my place. A real friend to Cyrodiil, that one.
Now, frankly, it seems like there may be truth to both these versions of events. Dengir's abdication was clearly not entirely voluntary, and likely partially a consequence of Imperial influence over the hold. But the old man also does genuinely seem a bit paranoid and not with it. His own brother, Thadgir, who he lives with, warns us to take his words with a grain of salt, and that he can be a bit much. Furthermore, Dengir offers us a brief quest to go steal a letter from Lod, the town's blacksmith, which he is convinced will prove that Lod has been collaborating with General Tullius and the Thalmor. But when we steal the letter, it's a totally innocuous text. So it's likely that both Dengir's Stormcloak sympathies and his old age played a role in his forced retirement. But regardless, our focus is on Helvard, who is now effectively governing the hold with Nenya, while Sidgir fiddles and drinks. Despite his corrupt master, Helvard seems to be an eminently good and competent man, just trying to govern the realm to the best of his abilities. Evidently, both he and Nenya, who also seems to be, pretty good, previously served Dengir, and Helvard even fondly reflects upon his former master, though admits that he had grown a bit too old.
Being House Jarl of Falkreath is an honor. Dengir was a good Jarl in his day, even if his day is past.
Thus, it seems unlikely that the contract on Helvard's head is a result of his corruption or shady dealings. Though given what seems to be his complacency in Dengir's removal, it's quite possible that a supporter of the former administration could have been responsible for ordering the contract. Interestingly, within Jarl Sidgir's personal, frankly way too lavish bedchambers, within a locked display case is a copy of the book, The Night Mother's Truth, a text which discusses the history and operations of the Dark Brotherhood. That Sidgir would have this in his possession is very suspicious. But the man also has no reason to want Helvard dead. Siggeir regularly alludes to how happy he is that Helvard and Nenya do all the governing, and there's no evidence of any animosity between the two characters. It's quite the opposite. Now, it's possible that given we find this in the Jarl's quarters, that this is a book Siggeir inherited from his predecessor, something that Dengeir himself once owned, and Dengeir would have a much, much better reason for calling a hit on his old housecarl, who was supposed to be sworn to him. However, again, while there may be a motivation, we lack any concrete evidence that the former Jarl himself would have stooped to this level. And even if he was willing to, you'd think his real gripe would be with his nephew, who did the real backstabbing. So while a Stormcloak supporter would be a good hypothetical candidate for calling the hit, it's difficult to determine who exactly would have. Given that Helvard is the housecarl to a disinterested Jarl, he also seems to be the chief military official in the hold and captain of the guard. So, his death is perhaps being arranged by a force who hopes to weaken the city's defenses. Again, perhaps pointing towards a Stormcloak plot. But for all the smoke, there's just no fire here, or anything directly implicating the rebels. So, if not a Stormcloak assassin, at least if not one who we can identify, who would be seeking to undermine Falkreath's military readiness by taking out its chief official? Well, once again, it's hard to determine, but I have a theory. You see, one side quest Dengeir of Stun may offer the player, after we recovered him that innocuous letter from Lod I mentioned earlier, is called Dark Ancestor. You see, Dengeir will pull the player aside and reveal that centuries ago, one of his ancestors, a ruler of Falkreath named Vighar, was transformed into a vampire. The community was able to overpower Vighar and bury him, and seal Vighar's grave with a wardstone, preventing him from rising again. This status quo has been maintained for hundreds of years. However, recently, someone stole the wardstone and freed Vighar from his grave, and the vampire has since retreated to Bloodlet Throne, a castle in the snowy mountains near Helgen, where he grows his strength and plots against the Hold. Dengeir will suggest that he fears Vighar may seek to reclaim his crown, and will ask that you venture to Bloodlet Throne and defeat him before this gets too out of hand. Thus, Dark Ancestor is a pretty standard dungeon crawl quest. You visit the old, vampire-infested fort and cut your way through a horde of undead bloodsuckers until you confront Vighar himself and defeat the villain, completing the quest. Now, there's no evidence of the vampires here having performed the Black Sacrament, nor is there much we can extrapolate to implicate them. However, Vighar and the Bloodlet Throne Coven would certainly have good reason to want Falkreath's defenses destabilized. And evidently, they've been preparing covert shenanigans for a while now, stealing wardstones and the like. Thus, Helvard's downfall may be being arranged not by his typical military adversaries, but by an undead count not too far away. Finally, one final suspect I have that's a bit unconventional is maybe this contract is being organized by the Brotherhood itself. Like, maybe Astrid is the client here. You know, the Dark Brotherhood's chief sanctuary is in Falkreath, and Helvard is a competent military official working hard to ready the defenses and root out any threats against the Hold. It stands to reason that a character like this could be something of a threat to Astrid's little group, and his removal could lift a good amount of pressure from the faction. Though, that's just my own innocuous little theory. So, whoever it was, whether it was supporters of a former administration, Stormcloak sympathizers, or evil vampires, or maybe even Astrid herself, whoever wants Helvard dead is a bit of a mystery, but it's only one of many in this quiet, forested little hold. The final contract that Nazir will offer us is for an Imperial woman named Safia. Here's how he describes her.
Ah, yes, the pirate captain. A ruthless she-devil, by all accounts. Deadly with a blade, And let's not forget her crew, loyal and bloodthirsty, the lot of them. This is my final contract, and certainly the most challenging. Be careful with this one, my friend.
Indeed, Safia is the captain of the Red Wave, an infamous pirate ship known for smuggling goods and narcotics between Skyrim and Morrowind. It's currently docked at the City of Solitude with an unknown departure time. More on that later. Safia commands a crew of 4, each of which we'll take a closer look at shortly, but for now, just for introduction's sake, I'd like to show him off. There's Dorian, a mild-mannered Breton thief who apparently only joined the crew recently, Eris, a Nord witch who joined the ship after losing her father, Xander, a Nord Nightblade who claims to have once captained his own ship before a horrific wreckage, and finally, Sabine Nayet, a Breton warrioress who serves as the vessel's first mate. The game itself, at least at first glance, doesn't really afford us a whole lot of information on the status of the Red Wave when we first exit Helgen. None of the characters aboard the ship have any dialogue windows, including Safia up until the Dark Brotherhood quest, merely affording us occasional radiant lines, and overall it's just easy to mistake this ship and its crew for insignificant background noise. However, a more thorough analysis reveals that the truth is anything but that. During the iconic quest Diplomatic Immunity, where the player poses as an Imperial delegate to gain access to a party at the Thalmor Embassy, during the party itself, you'll witness several of Skyrim's nobles, aristocrats, and Imperial officials mingle with each other and have all sorts of conversations. Now, the nature of these conversations that you can overhear is interesting because it's randomized. There are all these random lines of dialogue and random conversations that participants at the party may or may not say. One such radiant line of embassy dialogue references the status of the Red Wave. Take a listen.
Apparently the Red Wave has been docked in Solitude for well over a month, and with no sign of shipping out anytime soon. Some say the ship suffered damage to her hull when she struck an iceberg, and Captain Safia can't afford the repairs. Of course, she would never admit such a thing. Captain Safia is far too proud a woman for that.
So, the ship's current position at Solitude's docks may not be quite so voluntary. Captain Safia and her crew might be stuck until they can come up with the funds to make some repairs. Interesting. Also, just a thought, you have to wonder if any of the ship's crew might blame their captain for such a disaster. You know, in theory at least, as captain, Safia would be responsible for steering the ship into an iceberg. Perhaps some aboard would hold that against her. But I digress. Let's move on. Erikr is an extremely wealthy Nord who serves as Thane to Solitude's Jarl Elisif the Fair. He's also insanely corrupt and sleazy, and throughout the Blue Palace, several characters reference Erikr's underhanded behavior that borders on treasonous, constantly using his position to enrich himself at the expense of an ignorant Jarl and her kingdom. Anyway, if you sneak into the Blue Palace at the right time and avoid detection, it will occasionally be possible for you to eavesdrop on the following conversation between Erikr and Fulk Firebeard, the court's much more honorable and good-faith stewards.
I've heard the Empire plans to levy a tax on our trading ships. Falk, you've got to do something about this.
General Tullius needs more money for the war effort. We need the funds to arm and provision more troops.
Then let's increase the taxes on the farms and merchants. We can't afford to lose the loyalty of the ship captains.
We know full well about your investment in shipping ventures, Erikr. I've also heard troubling rumors about dealings between you and the crew of that pirate ship, the Red Wave.
The Jarl would be wise to remember that it is her thanes and my profits that are paying for this war.
So, Thane Erikr is understood to be working under the table with the Red Wave and its crew. Interesting. This notion can later be reinforced during the events of the Thieves Guild questline, where, after completing enough jobs for the faction in Solitude, Delvin Mallory will inform you about a special opportunity and direct you to contact Thane Eriker for details. Here's how it goes.
I understand what's best for Solitude, and Jarl Elisif knows it. It's about time you got here. I'm not accustomed to dealing with people who are unreliable. That's why I asked Delvin to send me his best. Nothing raises my ire more than having an agreement broken. It's bad for business, and it wastes time. Captain Volf of the Dainty Slode has decided to test my patience on this matter by neglecting to honor a trade agreement we had established. I need you to help me show him the error of his ways by sneaking on board the Slode and planting some contraband. You'll need to get your hands on some Balmora Blue from Sabine Niet down by the docks. She's the first mate on another ship, the Red Wave. Once you get your hands on it, I want you to plant it in Captain Volf's footlocker. I'll take care of the rest. Captain Volf is ashore right now, and I want the authorities waiting for him when he gets back.
Now get going. I don't want to see your face until the job's done.
So, essentially, Eriker is now revealed to also be dealing with the crew of another pirate ship, the Dainty Slode, docked a little further north of Solitude near the lighthouse. He wants you to secure some contraband from his friends on the Red Wave and use it to frame the captain of the Slode. This quest is easy enough. You can simply buy the Balmora Blue from Sabine Niet, the Red Wave's first mate, for a pretty substantial price of a couple thousand septims, or just steal it and be on your way. Afterwards, the captain of the Slode will be arrested, and Eriker will reward you with a spell tome. This corrupt Thane certainly has the resources to call the Dark Brotherhood against the captain of the Red Wave if he felt he'd been sufficiently wronged. However, there's no good evidence of any animosity between him and Safia. In fact, his dialogue with Falk Firebeard suggests that he's actively trying to shield the Red Wave from Imperial revenue collectors, implying that their relationship is going strong. And even if he did have a problem, he seems more inclined to leverage the Thieves Guild against his enemies than the Brotherhood. So, for now, while we should never discount Eriker's willingness to leverage unscrupulous entities against his enemies, he just doesn't seem like a very likely suspect. So, let's turn back to the crew of the Red Wave and see what they might have to reveal. Dorian is a Breton thief who dons a set of leather armor and only has a few dialogue lines, which we'll play in a second. He seems like an especially unlikely individual to hire out the Brotherhood. He has a fondness for books and is evidently quite new to the Red Wave, though he does suggest that Safia is a strict leader.
I've only been a part of the Red Wave's crew for a few weeks, but I've already learned to stay out of Captain Safia's way. Forget wine, women, and wealth. Give me a calm sea and a good book, and I'm happy. I hear Adonato Leotelli's staying up in Windhelm. I've read a few of his works. Be good to meet him someday. Don't misunderstand me, friend. I like my quiet, and I like to read. But you trifle with my ship, my crew, or my captain, I will kill you. You've not seen the night sky until you've seen it on the open sea.
Eris is a Nord witch who, like Dorian, seems rather mild-mannered and, frankly, kinda unsuited for the ruffian life she's assumed. Here are her lines.
My father was all the family I ever had. I felt so lost when he died. But the crew of the Red Wave's my family now. I've seen some truly wondrous sights since I took to the seas. I had no idea a man could die in so many ways. Just yesterday I saw a musician in the street playing a flute. It was beautiful. I want that flute. Dorian is helping me perfect my fencing, but I don't think I'll ever be as good as he is. Oh, did you need something?
Next is Xander. He is interesting because, as we'll see, Xander claims to have once captained his own ship, a vessel named the Argent Raptor, before accidentally running into an iceberg. Now he's been reduced to the status of a lowly crew hand on Safia's vessel.
I once captained a ship called the Argent Raptor. She struck an iceberg and went down just north of Windhelm. My shipmates scoff at my love of finery, but I know envy when I hear it. From ship's captain to lowly crewman. I suppose I deserve it after wasting all my coin on gambling and women. I hail from Cyrodiil, but after a misunderstanding with the law, I needed a swift change of scenery.
Now, as you may already know, there are no confirmed shipwrecks north of Windhelm that bear the name Argent Raptor. At least, not in any of the game's map markers. However, I have a theory for what's happening here. You see, while there may not be any shipwrecks specifically labeled as the Argent Raptor on our map, and frankly, there aren't very many unmarked shipwrecks either, directly north of Windhelm is a location called Pilgrim's Trench, which features several sunken vessels, which all seem to have run aground against a single iceberg. Now, frankly, I don't really understand how Pilgrim's Trench has managed to attract so many shipwrecks. It's not like it's near any natural harbor. There's no reason for any vessels to be sailing this close to an iceberg-ridden shoreline, but hey, you know, stuff happens, and this location matches where Xander says his vessel went down. So, I think any one of these sunken ships very well could be the remains of the Argent Raptor. Furthermore, interestingly enough, despite having been reduced to the status of a lowly crew hand, Xander carries the loot of a rich person. So, one of the ways the game determines the loot in a character's inventory is, well, you know, the developers go in and they pick out certain exact items they want the character to have. But various other characters also have randomized sections of loot, and in the game files, Xander is set to carry the loot of a rich guy. Thus, he's more likely to have large amounts of septims, jewelry, and gems in his inventory. That sort of thing. And given his fine clothes, he's clearly managed to maintain some of his wealth. Xander is the kind of guy who could absolutely have the resources to recruit the Brotherhood, if only he had the motivation. And finally, Sabine Nayet is the ship's Breton first mate. Being the vessel's second in command, she would clearly have the most to gain from the death of its potentially incompetent captain. Here's what she has to say.
You reek! A little friendly advice. Take a bath and get some new clothes. Whatever you're about to say, don't bother. I don't want to hear it. What hole did you crawl out of? Out of my way, or I'll cut you deep.
Clearly, this Barrel of Sunshine has some strong opinions, and in theory would stand to gain greatly from the death of her captain. And perhaps if she keeps this temper with everyone she speaks with, would be very, very upset about the recent damage Safia led the Red Wave to sustain. But beyond that circumstantial evidence, there's nothing to implicate her. The interior of the Red Wave is difficult to make sense of as well, as while there are several rooms and beds, none of the beds are actually owned by any of the individual characters. They're all just mutual property of the generic Red Wave faction, and thus nobody, not even Safia, really has their own quarters, and there's no items of particular note here anyway. Quick non sequitur, but this vessel's name, the Red Wave, is likely a nod to a quest from the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. You see, in Oblivion, at the docks of Anvil, we can encounter a high elf named Varale, who had a bit of a problem. Evidently, she recently hired out the crew of a ship called the Serpent's Wake to retrieve a lost family heirloom on her behalf. The mission was successful, they acquired the heirloom, but upon returning to the Anvil docks, the crew was mysteriously murdered, and now their ghosts haunt the ship. Varale would request that you venture into the vessel, defeat the ghosts, and recover the heirloom, beginning the quest, The Ghost Ship of Anvil. Upon completion, the elf would reward you with an enchanted sword, named the Red Wave, a cutlass which would drain 15 points of health for 6 seconds upon every strike. Later on in the story, it's eventually revealed that the crew of the Serpent's Wake was murdered by Matteo Bellamont, a mentally disturbed member of the Dark Brotherhood who the sailors made a mistake of mocking during one of his manic episodes. So Safia's ship's name, in a way, alludes to previous Dark Brotherhood shenanigans, though the connection seems to end there. When you approach the pirate captainess and inform her of your intentions, somewhat like Hern earlier, she'll say this.
Let me guess. You have some business to discuss. The Dark Brotherhood? Yeah. You think this is the first contract I've had on my life? I'm a pirate, sweetie. Assassination attempts are an occupational hazard. Now, shall we? Is someone there?
Thus, it would seem our arrival is of no surprise to this Imperial Nightblade, and we may not even be the first to attempt to claim a contract on her. Frankly, I love the sort of Homeric arrogance she has, probably one of my favorite minor characters in the game. But this dialogue would suggest that a price on her head has been around for quite some time, and there very well may have been some previous failed attempts at collecting. Thus, narrowing down an exact contender is difficult. It could be Eriker, it could be Sabine, it could even be Xander, or a whole host of enemies that you would expect a smuggling pirate captain to attract. Thus, whoever really placed the price on her head is truly a mystery that only Nazir knows, and Nazir won't tell. So, while a very fun character to sort of psychoanalyze, and it's a lot of fun to go through and look at all the relationships she possesses and the ways the Red Wave is mentioned, ultimately, pinning down a single candidate is impossible on this one. And with that, we are going to wrap up. An in-depth look at all of Skyrim's Dark Brotherhood side contracts. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope, even in the cases we couldn't solve, you guys appreciated some of the lore we dived into. You know, I'm real proud of that tangent we went on at Shriekwind Bastion, connecting it with LeMay Ball and the like during our Hern section. Anyway, regardless, I've taken enough of your time. Be sure to check out STALCRAFT X using my link in the description and code on screen now, and I hope to catch you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone.